Good morning, Dan and Amy. Former Michigan Congressman Mike Rogers, who's also a former U.S. Army officer and a former FBI special agent, will be joining us shortly. But Amy, I wanted to direct your attention. And, this is a show where we require our listeners to do a little bit of independent research and post-show homework.
Right.
We can't go over everything for you here. So I want to direct people's attention to this excellent piece in the American Interest by Neil Ferguson, the exquisite historian that he is, where he outlines the world that Donald Trump and the Trump administration is inheriting. He references foreign policy doyen Henry Kissinger. And his most recent book that essentially argues that the world is careening towards international anarchy. And he points out a couple of catalysts for said instability. One is the so-called Thucydides trap that presents itself to America with respect to China. This is a reference to Athens and Sparta. You have an emerging power and an established power, and they kind of inevitably lead towards conflict and perhaps war, like Athens and Sparta did in Thucydides' day. So that's an issue, as well as the relationship between Russia and the West in general, the lack of European hard power, and the escalating conflict in the Middle East due to the Obama administration's Olay approach to radical Islamic terror. So no shortage of threats, which is why it's encouraging to see the national security team that Trump has surrounded himself with so far, with important posts yet to be filled. Director of National Intelligence, I would say Secretary of Defense, and, of course, Secretary of State among them. And for more on this, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid former Michigan congressman and now TV star on
declassified
CNN.
on CNN.
Yeah, Mike Rogers. Mike, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the shout-out on Declassified American Spy Stories.
Yes.
Just want to hear about those.
Yeah, definitely. Good program. So you have been rumored, and I read this as recently as over the weekend in the Wall Street Journal. They had the whole kind of fantasy layout of who is being considered for what post, and your name was there front and center for Director of National Intelligence. Is that something that you're pursuing, or what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely not. And I think the mix-up is there is an Admiral, Mike Rogers, who is the head of the National Security Agency, who is being considered for the DNI. So I think this was a mail swap going on.
Oh.
But I know him personally. He is a great guy. I think he would make an excellent Director of National Intelligence. He's a cryptologist by training, so he is a code maker and a code breaker, and has spent his career on the cyber side, and which is a huge and growing threat for the United States. Our adversaries are getting so much better. So I think he would be an excellent selection if it were Admiral Mike Rogers. And then there's always the chance that my phone call will always get returned when I say, "Hi, it's Mike Rogers from the old intelligence days." I'm going to bet that I get my call returned pretty promptly.
So Benedict Cumberbatch will play Admiral Mike Rogers in the movie. And now, will Admiral Mike Rogers be hosting Declassified on CNN? I mean, I just want to see how far you're going to take this.
Well, he might. I'll certainly have to put him on. So Mike Rogers interviewing Mike Rogers.
Yeah, right.
That alone ought to confuse most people.
So, Mike Rogers, what do you think of Mike Rogers?
Right. Yeah. So
I think Mike Rogers is pretty great. I don't know what you guys think.
Boy, I mean, that could be that's a whole episode of Declassified. So you're not looking for posts in the administration. That's not part of what you're doing at present.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Are you at liberty to say what? I know that you and Governor Chris Christie were both on the transition team, and now you're not. What transpired there?
We were brought or Mr. Christie called me about in August and asked me to come on the transition team to head up the national security portfolio pre-election. And so most people don't realize there's a Republican team and a Democrat team that operate right after the primaries are over. And so the goal there is to get prepared so that when you have a president-elect, in this case Donald Trump, lots of work had already been done. Policy papers developed on where you go the first 100 days, selection of personnel, all of those kinds of things, policy reviews, what reforms in each agency and each portfolio. So I did all of that. Our job was to be done on Election Day. we met all of those metrics, and then once the campaign comes on, it's kind of what they call a merger and acquisition, if you will. The campaign takes over the transition, and it was a natural handoff for me. So they wanted the national security portfolio up in New York, so I handed all of my work over and am off doing the things that I love to do. So no harm, no foul. I still have a good relationship with the campaign, and I knew that there was a strong likelihood that the national security portfolio. The good news is I was able to have I think, a significant impact on the issues and the reform issues that they're going to try to need to deal with that first 100 days.
Well, speaking of that, I mentioned you were a former congressman from Michigan, but you weren't just that. You're also chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. And so the what appears to be yet another terrorist attack, and a particular type of terrorist attack, a stabbing on the campus of Ohio State yesterday. This follows stabbing attacks in St. Cloud, Minnesota, on the campus of UC Merced, another stabbing earlier this year in Columbus at a restaurant. How should we understand these attacks?
Well, these lone wolf attacks are the hardest for law enforcement intelligence communities to pick up on. So it was likely, we will find out. I know always this seems to happen in every one of these episodes. No, there's nothing to see here, move along. It was just a crazy guy doing bad things. Well, it was at least that. But what we find is that these people are being radicalized. I'm going to put money that this guy, once this investigation continues, they'll find that he was viewing radicalization material, social media likely, on the process of radicalization that would lead him to the point where he's willing to go out and kill other humans in the name of this radical jihadist activity that he was pulled to. So we're going to find that. I'm pretty sure of it. And then we'll go. We're going to rehash this debate about how we get after this every time we do this. The good news is I think there's a new sheriff coming to town that will look at being more aggressive about trying to intercede in this process of radicalization. We need to get this early. And one of the ways we do that, by the way, is taking away their ability to reach into the United States and touch these people with these radical, violence-prone social media activities that try to draw people into going out and stabbing people or running them over with a car.
I know, and when he did that, it was a vulnerable time. The Monday morning after a long 3-day weekend, people still celebrating the Ohio State double overtime win against Michigan. I mean, that's why people were so shocked what was, happening. But before he went on his rampage, he did post on Facebook that he's sick and tired of seeing fellow Muslims killed and tortured. So there was some warning. I mean, is there somebody that could better police social media? Because if you saw that, you think, oh, something's coming.
Right. The problem with that is that even if that were the only indication, pretty hard to take that statement in and of itself without anything else. So think about if you're an investigator and the only piece of information you have is I'm sick and tired of. Well, who hasn't said that along their lifetime somewhere about something? Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean those people are prone to violence. You have to have more than that. You have to be able to connect it back. So, again, I think that the key here, because if somebody wakes up tomorrow morning and decides to do something drastic, and it's the first time they've ever had that thought, pretty difficult to stop that. You want to be prepared at a campus, and there's a whole bunch of other things you can do to minimize or mitigate their ability to kill people. But we have to get it earlier. We have to get the people who are promoting and producing really high quality, I hate to admit, high quality recruiting videos and radicalization videos, trying to walk these people through the process. And ISIS has come out and said they want more stabbing attacks in places like the United States. We know that's happened. So that's where in my mind, you start, and then you track through probably cyberspace is the best way to start at this. And you have to continually disrupt them where they work, where they train, and that might mean in eastern Syria. We might have to be a little more aggressive about trying to disrupt their activities happening in eastern Syria that clearly, along a radicalization process, is impacting people in the United States to commit acts of violence.
I want to go back to this Neil Ferguson piece, American Interest, I mentioned at the outset, and get your assessment of what Henry Kissinger laid out as the 4 scenarios most likely to be catalysts for large-scale conflict. This is the Thucydides trap we have with China, the relations between Russia and the West, a collapse of European hard power, and then the escalation of conflict in the Middle East because of the leading from behind of the Obama administration. If you were advising President-elect Trump and his team, where would you suggest the ranking of those potential threats? How should those be ranked, I suppose, is the question. And is there anything that's not on the list of 4 that should be?
Well, I think he's certainly picked out the biggest ones. And we have to still remember China has nuclear weapons pointed at the United States, no small matter. Russia has nuclear weapons pointed at the United States. Iran is now probably empowered to continue to develop to get nuclear weapons. And the only ones that I would argue that they missed is North Korea. North Korea is very concerning about, but my time might be off. I want to guess 6 months ago, they fired missiles from a submarine that were designed to be intercontinental missiles. Now, they didn't show that they could go out in the atmosphere and come back, which would be all the trademarks of a nuclear weapon. That's very, very concerning. That means that they've leaped ahead in their technology. Firing a missile from a submarine is really, really hard to do. North Korea has done it. They're rattling their saber. They're being very provocative. We have troops stationed in North Korea, according to the armistice, about 30,000 troops in South Korea.
Right.
And the North rattles their cage. So we have a defense pact. If they go into North Korea, we are bound by this treaty to actually help defend themselves. So there's another one. And then you have, and add to that, a very young, unstable, almost irrational leader tells me, boy, we better be very, very careful about this. We know they have nuclear capability. Now we know that they have missiles capable of firing from submarines. They've been very, very threatening, not only to South Korea, but the United States. That's another problem I'd add on there that I would argue could escalate very quickly. We'd have to really worry about how we make sure we could contain that problem and de-escalate the violence.
Right. And
China is going to, I don't think they're shooting war anytime with China, but they're going to be very aggressive for the first time ever. They put troops outside of their region in Africa, in Djibouti, where Americans have troops. They've said that they want to have a bigger presence and more influence in the world, and you can clearly see that Russia is trying to get on the world stage in a way that's very provocative. So all of those are problems, and all of those are issues the next president will have to deal with.
And conflict with North Korea potentially brings in China as well. He is Mike Rogers, former Michigan congressman, former U.S. Army officer and FBI special agent, now the host of Declassified, Untold Stories of American Spies on CNN. Mike, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Thanks, Dan.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
And now,